President Biden is committed to keeping the United States out of direct combat with Russia, and some see the transfer of Polish MiG fighter jets to Ukraine via a U.S. military base in Germany as a high-risk escalation, which is partly why the U.S. is rejecting Poland's offer to turn over its collection of Russian-built MiGs to the Ukrainians, whose pilots know how to fly those jets. There's also the fact that there haven't really been any reports of air-to-air combat between Russian and Ukrainian air forces. So military experts argue that there are other weapons that may be more pragmatic in Ukraine's defense. The head of America's European Military Command, General Todd Walters, explained this week, quote, "We believe the most effective way to support the Ukrainian military in their fight against Russia is to provide increased amounts of anti-tank weapons and air defense systems." Now, the anti-tank missiles the general is referring to are known as Javelin missiles. The air defense systems are Stinger missiles. The U.S. and other NATO countries have already sent shipments of these lethal weapons into Ukraine. The American-made surface-to-air missiles, the Stinger missiles, are portable. They're fired from the shoulder of a single operator. They can shoot helicopters and other low and slow-flying aircraft right out of the sky. Stinger missiles are an absolute game changer for any military, but especially for a military that's otherwise outgunned by its enemy and that doesn't control the skies above them. We've seen this play out before. American-supplied Stinger missiles were a key factor in the Soviet Union's defeat in Afghanistan in the 1980s. In 1978, Afghanistan's centrist government was overthrown by Russian-backed military officers. They formed a new government backed by the Soviet Union, but the government was unpopular both within Afghanistan and among ardently anti-communist Western nations. So an insurgency developed, formed by devoutly Muslim fighters who hated godless communists, backed by American conservatives who also coincidentally hated the godless communists. The government would have fallen if the Soviets hadn't actually invaded Afghanistan in December of 1979 to prop it up. The Mujahideen, which is what the American-backed Muslim guerrilla fighters were called, were no match for the military might of the USSR. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., a little-known and unassuming Texas congressman named Charlie Wilson, known more for his colorful social life than his foreign policy chops, read an Associated Press wire describing Soviet helicopter gunships leveling villages and slaughtering anyone in their path. The article also illustrated how Mujahideen warriors were killing Russian troops with knives and pistols, hitting them over the head with shovels and stones in the middle of the night. So Charlie Wilson realized that the Mujahideen had the fight in them, but they needed something to up their odds against the Soviet control of the skies. So Charlie Wilson set to work with a cast of characters ranging from a rough-and-tumble CIA agent to Pakistan's military-supported president to a wealthy Texas socialite named Joanne Herring to arm the Mujahideen with the weapons needed to defend themselves. Ms. Herring was, and still is, a Christian conservative who thought at the time that well-armed, fanatically religious Muslims were preferable to Russian communist imperialists. So she used her substantial resources and influence to aid the Afghan cause. Over several years, Charlie Wilson was able to convince Congress to increase the military aid for Afghanistan from $5 million to upward of $5 billion. Importantly, Charlie Wilson and Joanne Herring got Stinger missiles onto the shoulders of Afghan rebels, allowing the Mujahideen to neutralize Soviet air power. And it worked. The Soviet Union was defeated by an Afghan resistance backed by the United States, and the losses and the expenditures on the war led directly to the collapse of the entire communist empire. Now, if you're thinking this reads like a Hollywood screenplay, it's because this true story was the inspiration for both a book and a subsequent Oscar-nominated film called Charlie Wilson's War, which was released in 2007. It's worth a read, or if you watch it, to give you a sense of how asymmetric warfare can work to devastating effect. Which brings us to the present. With more Stingers and Javelins now in the hands of the Ukrainian army, Vladimir Putin may be having flashbacks to a previous Russian defeat during which Putin was a young intelligence officer in the KGB. Now, Ukraine is nothing like Afghanistan. The Afghan story, by the way, as you know, doesn't end well, but that's for a lot of other reasons, including that the Mujahideen morphed into al-Qaeda. But the resolve and the bravery of the Ukrainian army and the civilians who have taken up arms does make one think back to Afghanistan and the lesson that, given the right tools, resistance can overcome much greater force. It's happened before, and it can happen again.